Welcome back to Apologetics 6323. In this lecture, we're going to look at the first three chapters of the Guinness book that I mentioned to you last time. Let me begin with two brief apologies. One has to do with the fact that I think that I failed to mention the Sean McDowell book as one of the six major textbooks for the course. This is a helpful little book on sort of dealing with practical apologetic issues as they arise in the church. And so that's the last of the books we'll read for the semester. So I've bookended this course with Guinness on the front end, simple, practical, but hard-hitting, and McDowell on the back end. So let me just make sure I mentioned that. I don't think I did. Second apology was I apologize for the crash at the end of Lecture 1. I assure you that I'm okay, but my camera fell down just as I was saying the final words, and I made the executive decision not to retape the whole lecture. So hopefully we'll just sort of write that off to be careful next time that you don't knock your camera over at the end. In the Guinness book, we're going to look at chapters 1, 2, and 3, creative persuasion, technique, and then the defense never rests. And this really gives you a taste, just in these first three chapters, gives you a taste of Guinness's approach. He's direct, he is readable, he is knowledgeable. That's one of the things that comes across to me whenever I read something by Guinness. He's obviously read his stuff, he knows what he's talking about, done a lot of research, and has found a way apparently to accumulate and store that research through all of the 4+ decades of his ministry. And so this is a delightful book. It'll have a couple of chapters that are a little longer and maybe a little more challenging than the three that we'll look at here today. But these are a good sort of taste into the beginnings of our examination of Guinness. Creative persuasion just really kind of gets on the front porch and draws us into his world in this chapter and tells us a little bit about what the book is going to attempt to accomplish. He talks about how we should always do apologetics in our own words rather than simply memorizing statements from others or memorizing lists from others. And I remember once that I had read an article years ago on 10 things that you can say to an atheist that will convince them that God is real. And so I remember thinking, well, that's not a bad idea. I get on the planes a lot, flying around to teach for Southern Baptist Seminary. And so I pretty much memorized the list of 10 things and got on a plane a few weeks later with a man who was not a Christian, and he was an agnostic, not a full-blown atheist. And I tried my 10 points out. I figured from Atlanta to Baltimore, which is about a 90-minute flight, that I had about 8 minutes per point or something like that. Once you got sat down and ordered something to drink and all the other stuff that happens on a flight. But it was an epic fail. Hopefully I made him think about some things. But by the time that flight was over and I had been able to reflect on my experience, I realized that that's not really the way you win people to the Christian faith. It's not that those things are not valuable. They are, at times, quite valuable. But I've noticed as a denizen of Facebook, and by the way, if you want to be a Facebook friend, I'm Chad Brand on Facebook. And on Twitter, I'm Chad Owen Brand, so I'd welcome you. If you follow me on Twitter, I'll follow you back. And if you request a Facebook friendship, unless there is something really weird on your profile at the beginning there of Facebook, then I will certainly accept your friendship. But if you go on Facebook or even Twitter, you're constantly finding, 15 ways to defend the resurrection, or 27 ways to debate with a Baha'i, or something along those lines. And they're worth reading. You can pick up some ideas along the way. But formulaic approaches, and this is really what, to a large degree, he is opposed to, formulaic approaches simply are not the way to go. You're a person. The person you're talking to is a person. Listen to them, find out something to know about them. If you only have an hour and a half flight, well, at least you can share the gospel in some manner, maybe even bring up a question or two that they would have something of a difficulty answering, or at least that would be something for them to reflect on later on. He talks about how our apologetics should be cross-centered and cross-shaped, so I will commend you to that short chapter. Chapter 2, technique, is called The Devil's Bait as a subheading. And again, he starts out with a nice little discussion of McDonald's and Kierkegaard. Whoever would put McDonald's and Kierkegaard in the same 2 or 3 pages at the intro of a chapter has to have a little bit of a weird mind or a very creative mind. I think that's what we're looking at here. He kind of carries on with the thing that I was mentioning a while ago on page 31, where he talks about winning the world by tomorrow afternoon, and talks about how in the age of technology, this has become, pardon me, an even greater amount. There's a greater amount of temptation for us to think that we can technologize our way into people's minds. But what he wants to accomplish here, if you start looking on page 32, is the issue, first of all, of no one way. He says there's not just one way to do it. And if he's been doing it for over 40 years, I think he probably knows something about that. I've been doing it for not quite that long, but I would also be able to say, even though I've not written as many books as Guinness, there's not just one way to do it. And a lot of times it depends on whether or not this is a friend that you have that you'll see during the week, several times, perhaps a co-worker, a family member, or whether it's somebody that you're just on a plane with for an hour and a half to Baltimore. He talks about how we have to recognize that even helpful tools like the 4 spiritual laws don't work on everybody. And I think I can tell you right now, honestly, that the 4 spiritual laws don't work on everybody. I was a part-time worker with Campus Crusade when I was in college at one of the campuses in Denver. And of course, we were told, push the 4 laws, push the 4 laws, push the 4 laws. And I didn't have much success. I had a little bit. I got a few people to pray to receive Christ. But for the most part, the 4 laws is a canned approach. It's not a bad approach, it's just a canned approach. And canned approaches don't work for everybody. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. He says that apologetics is an art and not a science. And by the way, he ends that first section at the bottom of 33 by saying Jesus never spoke to 2 people the same way, and neither should we. Every person is an individual. I like that. In fact, I think I put that on Facebook the other day. He goes on then to talk about how becoming a good apologist is an art and not a science. It's not formulas to memorize. It's not chemistry. It's a matter of learning how to listen, knowing your Bible, being able to relate to people on a real relational level, which sometimes we don't learn in education, in college or seminary. They don't necessarily teach you how to do that. Hopefully many of us come to college and seminary with the ability to relate to people already, or, and I'm having been a college and seminary professor for about 25 years now, I can say not everybody does. And I've had students ask me the most bizarre questions in class that had to do with how I'm going to put, when I pastor a church, this is what I'm going to do. And my response was, well, you won't be there very long if that's what you're going to do. Learn how to listen to people. And then he gives a number of analogies here in this chapter. He talks about how no 2 painters or sculptors are alike. And people who forget this tend to present apologetics as a chess game where we're trying to win. It's not a matter of winning. It's a matter of persuading people that Christ is the answer to their needs and to their basic problems in life. The Christ that is presented in the pages of the Bible. Well, the rest of chapter 2 is quite helpful. Chapter 3 I found very fascinating. the defense never rests. And that's where I came up with the statement that I made earlier in this lecture, that, or at least alluded to earlier in this lecture, that we should always be doing apologetics. We should always be thinking about whatever we're doing, watching a movie, watching The Walking Dead, listening to Eric Clapton, which I was listening to just before I sat down to make this video. I thought about playing it softly in the background so you could listen to him as well, my favorite all-time guitar player. But no matter what we do, we ought to be thinking about how this relates to me and my relationship to God. And is there a way to use something like this as a bridge that I would build to people that I'm talking to about the faith, people that aren't yet Christians? And one of the interesting things, very fascinating thing he does with this chapter, I'll have to cover it quickly because we're about out of time here, is that he looks at the Old Testament. And he sort of gleans from the Old Testament some key events or key instances of people performing an apologetic task. David, Hezekiah, Josiah. You could look at the prophets as he does. Isaiah. Maybe not so much Jeremiah. Jeremiah is sort of saying, no need to apologize you. No need to win you to the Lord. You're all about to go down. The Babylonians are coming. So I'm not going to try to get you to repent. It's too late. But it's very helpful. I don't know that I have read an entire chapter on Old Testament apologetics by any other author. And I have a pretty good selection and collection of works on apologetics in my library. All right, so take a look at those 3 chapters if you've not done it yet. Let me just recommend to you something I did mentioned last semester. It's probably helpful to read the chapters first, then watch this, and then read them again. If you don't have that much time, watch this first. We're going to have the lectures posted in a much more timely way. I'm recording this about a month or so before the class begins. We're ahead of the game better this time around than we were last time around. So if you don't have time to read the chapters twice, watch the lecture video and then read the chapters in the book. And when we come together next time, we're going to talk about Chesterton.